Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, this Florida State football team living rent free in my head heading into 2025. It's really hard to get a feel for what this team is going to be in the 2025 year. We got some questions about this football team going into 2025. Now, I want to preface this with the questions we have. It doesn't necessarily mean that there are not answers going into 2025. But when you start looking at, all right, how does this Florida State team come together? How does this Florida State team rebound from what we saw in 2024? These questions are probably what need to be answered. Fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, the Florida State fans, they'll a ton of support from the Florida State fans, even though talking this team has not exactly been sunshine and rainbows over the last couple of months. Can't thank you guys enough for rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. By far, question number one, Dylan, if you were to tell me, hey, what's the most important thing for Florida State in the 2025 year? How good will this run game be? And you can kind of split this question up into a few different talking points. I think, it starts with this offensive line. Mike Norvell, Herb Hand, Gus Malzahn, they've built this offensive line to run the football in 2025. Like, go look at the kind of offensive lineman that they brought in. And this is one of the things that I appreciate the most about what Florida State did in the offseason in the portal is not necessarily the biggest names that you saw in the portal at any positions, but you saw them really focus on, hey, can we get players that fit what we want to do? And you look at this unit, and it starts with the tackles. Micah Pettis, Gunnar Hansen, both 330 plus. I think Micah Pettis probably pushing 350. This is a big physical offensive line that I think has the capability of moving bodies off the line of scrimmage. We know Gus Malzahn wants to run the football. Is this offensive line good enough to really get the run game going in 2025? Is probably the biggest question we have going into 2025.
And I think that's a good point because, if you're a team that's going to throw the ball 50 plus times a game, Micah Pettis probably shouldn't be your tackle because I
Agreed.
wouldn't have a ton of faith in him to be able to go do that job. He's not the greatest athlete at that tackle spot, not a particularly premier pass protector. But you said it. I think Florida State kind of knew what they wanted to do this year. They wanted to be able to run the ball effectively. Everything they kind of did. They bring in a new offensive coordinator in Gus Malzahn, kind of known for what he can do developing his run scheme. Bring in a quarterback in Thomas Castellanos, who is not necessarily a pocket passer, but if you put him in a really creative run scheme, I think can be really effective. And then bringing in a bunch of big heavies on the offensive line that you're just going to try to move people and run the ball. So I think it was a very clear message that we're going to get back to the ground. We're going to get back to being physical, and we can live if that doesn't work out. But that is what Florida State feels like they're going to try to do.
And I think that the next conversation is Thomas Castellanos and how they decide to use him. He's, in my opinion, one of the most misunderstood quarterbacks in the country. I think a lot of people look at him in 2024 and say he ain't that good. Look, he really wasn't all that good in 2024 at Boston College until he got benched. And the narrative is, all right, Florida State's quarterback one is a guy that got benched at Boston College. That's just, it's not fair.
Him and Bill O'Brien was a total
disaster.
It was never going to work. I don't think anything about that fit made any sense to me. So kind of get why it didn't really work, because those two, Bill O'Brien's never really worked with a quarterback like what Castellanos does.
And if you're not going to lean into what he can do, he ain't going to be a great quarterback. Like, if you go put him in a pro style offense and ask him to be a pocket passer and drop back 50 times a game, he ain't going to be all that good. Now, that's not why Florida State brought Thomas Castellanos in. I want to go back to the 2023 season for two different reasons. Number one, what Thomas Castellanos did at Boston College. I mean, Mike Norvell and that Florida State defense know all about how dangerous this kid can be when he's used in the right way. You go back to 2023, had a lot of designed quarterback runs, had 47 carries that went for 10 plus yards, had 50 missed tackles forced on the season, ran for over 1,000 yards. I think there's another element where, look, we know what he can do being creative in scramble situations. You can also get this kid involved in design runs, and he's really, really effective. And then I go to how UCF and Gus Malzahn use John Rice Plumlee, who's a very similar kind of quarterback. No, the comp for Thomas Castellanos might be John Rice Plumlee. They use John Rice Plumlee in a lot of design quarterback runs too, really successful. And like 2023 was much more successful than 2024 for Gus Malzahn and that UCF offense. How much are they willing to run Thomas Castellanos in those design quarterback run situations? And then the other conversation is, look, he's not the biggest quarterback, so can you keep him healthy for 12 plus games as well? Is certainly a conversation that, Gus Malzahn and Mike Norvell need to have as well.
I mean, look, Gus Malzahn's never been afraid to run his quarterbacks. You go back to the Auburn days with Nick Marshall. I mean, they ran him a lot. And like Thomas Castellanos, if he's not running the ball a lot, I don't think it's going to be wildly effective. So I think it has to be part of the game. They have to be willing. And it's not like he's had a ton of injuries to my knowledge. And he didn't get hurt in that 2023 year. He was running the ball a ton, it felt like. So I don't know. He's like a good sized, stocky guy. He's not the tallest player in the world, but he's like thick enough. I don't really see him as a guy you worry about running too much.
My take on Thomas Castellanos is he's really good at avoiding getting smoked. And that's just kind of like a thing. Like when you go back and watch him in 2023, he's not the biggest. He ran the football a lot. You know who's very, like Lamar Jackson is very good at this too. It's like, hey, we're going to run you a lot. We're going to trust you to take care of your body. And Lamar Jackson's really good at avoiding just getting his bell rung. Like Thomas Castellanos, you can say a lot of the same things for him going back to 2023 at Boston College. I'm with you. You don't bring Thomas Castellanos in to be your quarterback one if you're not going to run the football with him, because you need to do that if you want to get the best version of Thomas. Last thing, question mark that I have, this running back room, is it going to be a committee? Is there going to be a workhorse that emerges? I think you have three, names to monitor in terms of workhorse backs. Gavin Sawchuk coming from Oklahoma, freshman Usman Kramoa, who I think the two most talented running backs on this football team, Dill, are going to be joining this program in the summer, and Gavin and Usman. And then I know you're a Roydell Williams fan. I know Florida State is a Roydell Williams fan as well. My pushback on Roydell Williams emerging as the bell cow is, would they have gone to the portal and got a guy like Gavin Sawchuk if they felt like Roydell Williams could have been that guy for Florida State in 2025?
Look, and I'm not sure they have that like headliner that you need to be taking 70% of the carries. Like, I don't look at anyone in this backfield as like, I'm trying to think of like Adrian Peterson.
Well, no, make the comp to RJ Harvey. Make the comp to because that's what they did with RJ Harvey at UCF. Like they ran RJ Harvey a lot and then used a couple other running backs to spell him. I don't need to compare people to Adrian Peterson.
No, but I'm just not sure I think this will be kind of a committee backfield. I don't know why it wouldn't. Like, I don't know that Gavin Sawchuk is head and shoulders above Roydell Williams.
So can I push back on that real quick? Because it's like we've seen flashes of Gavin be that guy. Go back to the end of 2023. He had 5 straight games of over 100 yards, averaged over 6 yards per carry in that 2023 season. Dill, 12 months ago, we were talking about Gavin Sawchuk being one of the better running backs that we thought in the country. Then the 2024 season happens. Oklahoma's offensive line is a joke, and we don't really have that conversation anymore. I think there's that chance that Gavin Sawchuk can be that guy. Usman Kramoa as a freshman, I think excites a lot of Florida State fans. And then I feel like you just use Jalen Lucas. Don't sleep on Jalen Lucas. Like if there's one guy that knows how to use a player like Jalen Lucas, I think it's going to be Gus Malzahn. Do we see a running back emerge and be the workhorse, be that true all-conference running back for Florida State? I think that's a big question, because if that happens, that's huge for this football team. I don't know if we'll see it. Now, I think that's to be determined. Dill, tight end play. Is Landon Thomas ready to block in line? I think he's your most dynamic pass catcher, but you're not going to play much in this Gus Malzahn offense if you can't get it done as a blocker at the tight end position. That's a question that I have for Florida State going into 2025.
And honestly, I still think Randy Pittman, people are sleeping on him.
Yeah, I agree.
I thought he was so good for Gus Malzahn, really good blocker, both in line and in space, if you will, because that is kind of a requirement of that tight end H-back role that Gus Malzahn likes to use. So I imagine Randy Pittman's going to get the lion's share of the snaps at that tight end spot. I just think he's most equipped to do what Gus Malzahn wants him to do. But
Yeah.
I think you're right. Like, you talk about a team that needs weapons, and you see what Florida State did going to the portal for that wideout spot. Landon Thomas at least gives you that sort of weapon vibe. Like, Randy Pittman's, I think, really solid tight end.
Yep.
He's not going to strike fear in your eyes as a pass catcher, in my opinion, like in terms of what he can do, like varying up or how
And
many.
that's why I think Landon Thomas is so important, because I think he adds, like, look, Biscuit Douglas, and I don't mean it, like, you might as well just bring in a 6 offensive lineman, because he gives you almost zero pass catching threat ability. I think Randy Pittman, I think you're right, by the way. Like, Randy Pittman, go back to him as a sophomore at UCF last year. He is second on the team in targets, had over 400 receiving yards, 20 first down catches. Like, he was kind of a sneaky weapon for that UCF offense in the 2024 year. Can he be that for Florida State in 2025? I think Gus Malzahn thinks that, because he wouldn't have brought him over to Florida State with him if he didn't. But Landon Thomas, I think, does offer the highest upside. I think you want to get him on the football field, but I think we both know, like, you're not getting on the football field for Florida State if you can't get it done as a blocker in this offense. The last question I have is, like, who will be the freshman playmakers? Because I think you could make the argument that these guys have a massive impact on what this offense can be. Whether it's Usman Cremo at running back, whether it's the 2 wide receivers, Tayshawn Jelzy, Javon Boggs. Like, to me, it's Javon Boggs. This was a guy that was uber productive coming out of high school. He's coming into Florida State as a guy that you feel like's pretty college ready, and that's all we heard coming out of spring is Javon Boggs was one of the most productive pass catchers in spring practice. We know we have our top 2 wide receivers in Deuce and Squirrel. Can Javon Boggs be that 3rd wide receiver in this set for Florida State? I think there's a really good chance he can be. I think, like we've said for a lot of other teams, there's a lot of freshmen that are coming in these days in college football at wide receiver and making big time differences for their football teams.
And I think it's like, to me, it's kind of who can fill that like boundary wide receiver, but more of a possession wide receiver, can run the whole route tree. Because kind of Deuce Robinson, you know what you brought him in to do, and that's work down the field. He's not
Yes.
wildly varied in terms of what routes he can run and how well he can separate underneath. Squirrel White, that's kind of a pure slot guy in my mind.
Yep.
He's going to be that boundary wide receiver who in a one-on-one spot can just get open, kind of run all the routes and be kind of that utility player from the boundary spot. If that can be Javon Boggs, I think that's a skill set that they need to fill in that room.
Yeah, like the multi-dimensional wide receiver. Yeah, I do think you hope that Deuce Robinson can be that guy, because I think there's a chance we just haven't seen it yet, and it sounds like he had a good spring practice too. I think Javon Boggs can be a feature in this offense. Now, the Florida State defense, still, I think the biggest question is the biggest question generally, and this is kind of a general question, is Tony White year 1. Historically, he's been really good. I mean, he came into Nebraska in the 2023 year and had them playing as a top 20 defense in the country. Can he do that for Florida State? That, you talk about the biggest reason to believe in Florida State, though. It doesn't have to do with all the red and blue names, the newcomers coming into this roster. It has to deal with the coaching staff on both sides of the football. Now, I mean, we were talking about maybe one of the worst coaching staffs in the country last year for Florida State. Now you fast forward and say that Gus Malzahn, Tony White, you could make an argument that's some of the better coaches that we see in the ACC. Year 1 under Tony White is like that overarching umbrella question. Then I look at questions we need to see answered for Tony White to have year 1 success. I think it starts with Big Darrell Jackson on the inside of this defensive line.
And that's such an important role for what Tony White wants to do, because he's kind of going to play a little bit smaller everywhere else and try to be athletic and try to get into the backfield.
Yes.
You need a good nose guard who can play, and they had it. Ty and Nash Hutmaker for Nebraska were both really productive, really effective nose guards. Darrell Jackson's really coming along. I feel like as much as like last year, almost there wasn't, people almost like didn't want to talk about any positives, because how could you when you go 2-10? Darrell Jackson, I honestly thought was playing pretty decent football.
End
He
of the
wasn't
year.
getting a really ton of help around him, it didn't feel like, for most of the year, but he did start to come on and was playing at a high level. If he can play well, and then Kevin Wynn's probably the guy, because you probably
Agreed.
want 2 of them so you can keep him fresh.
Yeah.
Kevin Wynn's probably got to just be able to be ready to play early.
As a freshman. And look, kind of weird because we heard a lot of buzz around a bunch of different freshmen. Kevin Wynn was like radio silence during spring. I pegged him as probably like one of the more day one ready defensive linemen we saw come out. And we talk about like built to play nose. Dude's like 6'2", 335, absolute fire hydrant. I would love to see him play. And it doesn't have to be 40 snaps a game. Like, can you give us 15 to 20 quality snaps to spell Daryl Jackson, keep Daryl Jackson fresh? KJ Sampson, probably another name that you're monitoring as well. The last one is just, are the linebackers good enough? And here's my answer that I think that you're not going to have All-American linebacker play at Florida State. I don't think Florida State fans are concerned about having All-American linebacker play. They just want to have decent linebacker play because it was far from that in the 2024 year. I know Omar Graham has been a guy that's emerging. My take on the linebacker room has a lot less to do with the personnel and more of like Tony White knowing what to do with backers and how to get the best out of these backers. Do you have a coaching staff that can get the best out of this unit so that they're just not a liability in the 2025 year? Like, because again, this was never going to be a one-year fix at linebacker. Florida State really struggled to recruit linebackers over the last couple of years. You weren't going to be able to snap your fingers and get All-American linebacker play in 2025. You got to have Tony White develop these guys to just be solid in the 2025 year.
Omar Graham's got to be the guy you look at because from at least like an athletic trade standpoint, like there's something there. I think like Elijah Herring. I mean, he's a floor raiser. Like there's a reason he was kind of let go from Tennessee. Almost it felt like not a premier athlete at the college or like Power 4 level. Let's say.
Agreed.
Omar Graham's got to take over, really step up and be a guy because I just don't know that you have his like a second guy who really has the ability to be great. Let's say or really.
I agree. Now I want to finish this conversation out with it, and I will have this conversation more as we roll into the summer months. Like, Dill, if you're a Florida State fan, and I know you're not, but if you were putting yourself, and this is why I would love to hear from the Florida State fans in the comment section. If you're a Florida State fan, what do you want to see? What are the expectations going into 2025 from Mike Norvell and this group?
I really think it's probably around 7 wins. Like
7,
in
8,
the ACC, Florida State really shouldn't be losing more than 4 or 5 games a year. In 5 games, like
no, they should be. I'm going to stop you right there. They should certainly not be losing 5 games a year at Florida State. Now, 2025 is a little bit of a different conversation because you're coming off a 2-win season. I'm with you. Like the expectations for me, and I hate having this conversation of, hey, don't expect to go to the playoffs in the middle of May. But for Florida State, it's like, I just want to see this team take a step and see these players on the roster get better. And if I'm a Florida State fan, it almost feels like I don't look, I want to go to a bowl. I want to win more than six games. I almost care about like, all right, what's the young talent looking like on this football team? Are we getting better as football players? Because you got to get that right. Before you go get back to the college football playoffs, you got to get the problems that we saw with this program back on track. And I think that starts with getting players better on your team because I don't think we saw enough player development over the last couple of years. That's probably where it starts. I feel like it matters more how this team looks than what their record actually says at the end of 2025. And then we go start building back. It's not going to be a one-year fix. And I think that's probably the most important conversation to have. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.